There is a kind of heartbreak that never announces itself with noise. It doesn't arrive with slammed doors or screaming arguments, but settles in somewhere between the life you built and the life you almost had. And it stays there, patient and permanent, no matter how many years pass or how many other faces come along to fill the silence. Brad Pitt has stood at the summit of Hollywood fame for more than 3 decades, worshipped by millions, desired by nearly everyone, and envied by the rest. Awards, box office records, magazine covers, a career that reads like a masterclass in reinvention, and yet behind all of that, beneath the sunglasses and the jawline and the easy grin, a quieter story has always been running. Not a story about ambition or stardom, but about love. About the kind of love that doesn't release you even after you've told yourself 1,000 times that it has. People have spent years arguing about which woman mattered most to Brad Pitt. Whether it was Gwyneth Paltrow gliding through the golden 1990s on his arm, or Jennifer Aniston, the woman the whole world fell for right alongside him, or Angelina Jolie, the force of nature who gave him 6 children and more chaos than any man should be asked to survive. Each name carries real weight, and each one represents a different version of the man, a different era of his becoming. But what happens when he finally tells you the answer himself? What happens when, after decades of deflection and carefully worded non-answers, Brad Pitt looks back at everything and names her? That is where this story begins, not with a premiere or a rumor, but with a confession, and confessions from someone who has spent a lifetime under the brightest possible spotlight tend to say far more than any headline ever could. Before the world knew that name, before Thelma and Louise made an entire planet stop mid-sentence, Brad Pitt was simply a young man from Springfield, Missouri, with a face that didn't belong anywhere ordinary and a hunger that didn't know how to stay quiet. Church pews, Friday night football, American flags on front porches, summers that stretched on without end. That was the world that shaped him, and it was about as far from Hollywood as a life could get. Maybe that distance is exactly what made him so compelling when he finally arrived there, driving west in the mid-1980s with almost nothing to his name, taking odd jobs to survive, and famously spending time in a giant chicken suit outside a restaurant, handing out flyers to strangers who had no idea they were looking at a future icon. And yet even then, the people who crossed his path noticed something, a warmth to him, a kind of gravitational pull that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with presence. His earliest relationships reflected exactly that. British pop singer Sanita, who had already tasted fame across the Atlantic, dated the young Brad Pitt starting in 1986, and her description of him afterward sounds almost too genuine to fit the industry she worked in. Beautiful, she told people. Sweet. Fun. Completely without pretense. Their relationship ran for nearly 2 years before ending in 1988, long before anyone outside of casting offices had any idea who he was. And when she eventually saw him in Thelma and Louise, a wave of regret hit her so sharply it surprised her. That particular feeling, the ache of understanding what you had only after it was gone, would become a recurring thread in Brad Pitt's romantic life, though in the years that followed, he would be the one doing most of the realizing. Co-star Jill Scolin came next, a brief connection formed on a 1989 film set, followed by a period of closeness with performer and voice actress E.G. Daily, who would later speak of him with something close to reverence when his True Hollywood story aired. She saw the intensity in him, she said, the depth beneath the charm, and she believed even then that he was heading somewhere most people never reach. Rumors also circulated about a connection to Robin Givens, whose messy separation from Mike Tyson at the time made any association with her explosive tabloid material, though the full truth of what actually happened between them was never settled. Then came a brief and almost comedically ill-fated link to Christina Applegate, then one of television's brightest young stars, thanks to Married with Children, who by her own admission left Brad at the 1989 MTV Movie Awards for someone else entirely, a story she later confirmed on live television without blinking. It was, by any fair measure, a humbling moment for a young man still finding his footing in Hollywood. Juliette Lewis was different, and what developed between them held for 4 full years. Their relationship stretched from 1989 into the early 1990s and covered some of the most important years of Brad's rise, spanning 2 films they made together and a connection both on screen and off that anyone paying attention could see. Brad later called their time together one of the greatest relationships he had ever known, telling Vanity Fair in 1995 that he still loved her even 2 years after they had separated, a confession that says something about how genuinely the thing had mattered to him. Juliet herself, by the time anyone thought to revisit the question in 2014, had moved entirely past it and made clear she had no interest in being remembered as a footnote in someone else's biography. A fair point that also pointed to something that would follow Brad Pitt for decades. The women who loved him too often found themselves reduced to chapters in his story rather than authors of their own. By the mid-1990s, the transformation was complete, and Brad Pitt was no longer a rising talent or a promising face, but a phenomenon. Legends of the Fall had cemented his ability to carry serious dramatic weight, and Seven had shown the world he could hold a frame opposite the most intense performers of his generation. That same film, David Fincher's dark thriller, put him in the same room as Gwyneth Paltrow in 1995, and whatever ignited between them burned fast and undeniably bright. She was the daughter of Hollywood royalty, polished and self-possessed in a way that looked effortless. He was the Midwestern boy made extraordinary, magnetic, and a little rough in exactly the right way. And together they looked like something a studio might dream up to represent the whole idea of glamour. At the 1996 Golden Globe Awards, Brad stood at the podium and called her his angel and the love of his life in front of everyone, the kind of declaration that made the world exhale all at once. The proposal came in Argentina, on a balcony under a night sky that could not have been more perfectly arranged if someone had written it into a script, and 24-year-old Gwyneth said yes, without hesitation. Their engagement dominated celebrity news for the better part of a year, but in June 1997 she ended it, saying later that she had been too young, too unprepared for the gravity of committing herself to a life alongside someone of his magnitude. Her father, who adored Brad completely, reportedly found the decision devastating. Brad, for his part, never said a harsh word about her publicly, not then and not ever. And years later, when the two found themselves in the same room again, they laughed together like old friends who share a secret that no longer has the power to wound. She called what they had major love at first sight. He listened, smiled, and said nothing that would contradict her. Jennifer Aniston entered his life next, and the world responded with something close to joy. Their introduction had actually happened years earlier through their managers, but the timing had been wrong on that first attempt, and by 1998 the timing was finally right. Jennifer had just ended a relationship with actor Tate Donovan, and Brad's engagement to Gwyneth was already more than a year behind him. When they connected this time, it felt, by all accounts, exactly like what it looked like from the outside: easy, natural, and inevitable. She later described their first date as fun and uncomplicated, the kind of evening where you realize the person across from you isn't performing at all, just simply being themselves. By September 1999, they walked the Emmy Awards red carpet together, and the reaction was immediate and total. This wasn't just two attractive people choosing each other. This was America's golden movie star and America's most beloved television actress choosing each other, and the public received it as a personal gift. The engagement ring reportedly took Brad 7 months of working with jeweler Silvio Damiani to get exactly right, which tells you something about how seriously he was taking it this time. Their wedding in Malibu on July 29, 2000 brought 200 guests, a gospel choir, fireworks overhead, and nearly 50,000 flowers arranged across the venue, with estimates placing the total cost near $1 million. Though none of that detail mattered as much as the photographs that emerged afterwards showing the two of them laughing and looking at each other the way people look when they cannot quite believe their own luck. Jennifer's father, John Aniston, walked her down the aisle and told reporters afterward how beautiful his daughter looked, and for a moment the whole story felt settled. The years that followed were full of the ordinary texture of a life genuinely shared. Brad's 2001 guest appearance on Friends, where he played a character who despised Jennifer's Rachel Green with theatrical intensity, became one of the most celebrated episodes in the show's history, and their jointly run production company Plan B Entertainment would go on to produce films including The Departed and 12 Years a Slave. None of that could prevent what was already quietly shifting underneath the surface, though. In 2003, Jennifer hesitated visibly when asked in a W magazine interview whether Brad was the love of her life. Catching herself mid-thought and softening the admission, But the pause itself had already said something that no amount of careful wording could take back. That same year, Brad began filming Mr. and Mrs. Smith opposite Angelina Jolie, and whatever was already fraying between him and Jennifer began to unravel faster than either of them acknowledged. January 2005 brought the separation announcement. March brought Jennifer's divorce filing. Photographs of Brad and Angelina together with her children in Kenya surfaced within weeks, and Jennifer's resulting Vanity Fair interview, one of the most widely read celebrity profiles of that decade, described her as cracked open by everything that had happened. She was devastated and she admitted it freely, but even in that pain she refused to reduce Brad to a villain, and when she said she would love him for the rest of her life, you could tell she meant every word. Angelina Jolie arrived in Brad Pitt's world like a weather system, the kind you cannot prepare for and cannot fully explain once it has passed. Their chemistry on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith had been visible to everyone who witnessed it, and Angelina herself acknowledged later that the realization crept up on her gradually, that she understood something was happening only when she noticed how much she looked forward to going to work every single day because he was there. By 2006, she was pregnant with his child, their daughter Shiloh arriving in May of that year, and Brad formally adopted Angelina's children Maddox and Zahara, who took his name alongside hers. A son named Pax followed in 2007, and twins Knox and Vivian arrived in 2008, which meant that Brad Pitt, who had spent his 30s genuinely uncertain about fatherhood, was suddenly the patriarch of a family of 8 people living under constant global observation. The press named them Brangelina and treated their every movement like dispatches from a foreign government. And for years they carried the weight of that attention alongside humanitarian work in refugee camps and appearances at global forums that lent their celebrity what looked, from the outside, like actual purpose. They married at their French estate Chateau Miraval in 2014, in a ceremony where their children played central roles, where Angelina's dress carried her children's drawings embroidered into the fabric, and where the vows themselves had been shaped with help from young voices who wanted their parents to promise specific things. That changed in September 2016 when Angelina filed for divorce, citing the health of the family, a phrase that covered far more than it revealed. Reports of an altercation on a private plane circulated widely, and immediately, Brad denied harming any of his children, and both the FBI and Child Protective Services opened investigations before closing them without charges. The legal proceedings that followed stretched into 2024, with financial disputes and the fate of Chateau Miraval consuming enormous energy on both sides, and what had once been the most talked about love story in the world had become one of the most painful public separations in Hollywood memory. After Angelina, Brad pulled back from almost everything. He worked on his sobriety, attended therapy consistently, and began the slower work of understanding how he had arrived at that particular destination. His name surfaced in connection with MIT professor and design innovator Neri Oxman, whose intellectual world seemed to genuinely fascinate him, though Oxman denied any romantic involvement while describing him warmly as someone who still carried the timeless quality of classic cinema. A period of closeness with German model Nicole Paczorowski followed, the two of them photographed at Chateau Miraval, the very estate he still co-owned with Angelina at the time. Those sources described it as casual and never truly committed. Model and writer Emily Ratajkowski's name appeared briefly in 2022 following her own separation, with reports describing their meetings as easy and companionable, but neither pushed that narrative forward, and it dissolved before it could become anything more substantial. Ines de Ramon arrived quietly in late 2022, a jewelry designer who had recently separated from actor Paul Wesley, and what began tentatively between them grew steadier with each passing month. They celebrated his 59th birthday together in December of that year at an Italian restaurant in Hollywood, sources describing them as genuinely comfortable and happy in each other's company. And by February 2024, she had moved into his Los Angeles home. Their red carpet appearance together at the Venice Film Festival in September 2024 gave the world a striking image of Brad Pitt looking, by every available account, like a man who had finally exhaled. And yet, even with Ines beside him, even with the custody battles quieting and his sobriety intact and his career experiencing a genuine renewal, the name that kept returning in conversations and interviews and in the unspoken undercurrent of public attention was Jennifer Aniston. In 2007, speaking to a magazine, Brad said that he and Jennifer maintained a deep friendship and that their time together was not something that could simply be erased, not a throwaway line, but a deliberate one. She had said in 2006, just 1 year after the divorce was finalized, that she loved Brad and would love him for the rest of her life. And those words carried a weight that time never quite dissolved. His attendance at her 50th birthday party in 2019 made international news despite being a private gathering. Backstage at the Screen Actors Guild Awards in January 2020, Brad reached out and held her hand for a moment as she walked past after her win for the morning show, and the photograph that captured it circulated for weeks across every platform imaginable. Later that year, their virtual table read together, playing characters who flirted openly, displayed a natural ease and warmth between them so visible and unguarded that millions of people watching chose to believe it meant something that neither of them was saying out loud. Jennifer described it afterward as fun and friendly, and she wasn't wrong, but she also wasn't the only one who got to decide what it meant to everyone who watched. Brad Pitt has lived one of the most observed romantic lives in the history of modern celebrity, loved by women of extraordinary talent, shaped by relationships that left visible marks on the man he became, and brought through more heartbreak than most people are asked to endure across an entire lifetime. What makes his acknowledgement of Jennifer Aniston so genuinely moving is not its drama, but its plainness. No grand gesture attached to it, no fireworks or declarations from a stage. Just a man who did the hard work of looking back at everything without the distortions that fame and fresh desire impose on memory, and recognizing what had been real. The love you carry longest is not always the loudest one, not always the one that produced the most chaos, or the most beautiful children, or the most breathtaking public moments. And sometimes it is simply the one that felt like home in a way nothing else quite managed to replicate, that you walked away from not because it was wrong, but because something else called louder at exactly the wrong moment. Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston are not reuniting. Both have built separate lives, found separate versions of happiness, and made their individual peace with the shape of things as they are. But in naming her, in confirming across decades of photographs and reunions and warm-eyed glances what millions of people had always sensed, Brad said something unexpectedly honest, that some loves don't end. They simply change form, settle somewhere beneath everything else, and stay there, quiet and permanent, in the place where the loudest stories cannot reach.